What if I told you that discovering your future wife's entire life was built on lies wasn't the worst part of your wedding day? What if I told you that by sunset, she would be dead, and no one could agree if it was suicide, murder, or something far more calculated? Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to find out they deceived you? Have you ever felt the crushing weight of family expectations pressing down on your chest, making every breath feel impossible? Do you know what it's like when shame becomes so overwhelming that death feels like the only escape? This isn't just another immigration fraud case. This is the story of Ana Varma, a 24-year-old bride who collapsed and died on her wedding day, just hours after her fake Canadian college degree was exposed in front of hundreds of guests. But here's what makes this case absolutely chilling. 3 different groups of people had motives to silence her forever. The education agent who sold her the fraudulent documents, facing criminal charges and desperate to eliminate witnesses. The groom's family, humiliated publicly and terrified of legal consequences that could destroy their immigration status. And even her own relatives caught between protecting family honor and facing financial ruin from the dowry scandal. When paramedics arrived, they found Ana unresponsive with traces of unprescribed sedatives in her system. The coroner ruled it a suspicious overdose, but couldn't determine if she took the drugs herself or if someone else administered them. 3 years later, no one has been charged with her death. Here's what's really disturbing. Most people won't care enough about this story to seek justice for Ana. They'll watch, feel momentarily outraged, then scroll to the next video without taking action. If you're someone who values truth and refuses to let victims be forgotten, prove it by hitting that subscribe button. Because most people won't, and that's exactly why stories like this get buried while the real criminals walk free. What you're about to hear will expose a criminal network spanning 2 countries, reveal how immigrant families become trapped in webs of deception, and show you why Ana's death might have been the most calculated murder disguised as suicide you've ever encountered. But first, we need to go back to where it all began, in a small Punjabi town where dreams cost everything, and sometimes, everything isn't enough. They called her the Golden Girl of Bassi Kalen, not because she was wealthy, but because everything she touched seemed to turn to hope. Ana Varma was the kind of daughter who folded her dreams into a worn notebook, writing down goals in careful English. Study abroad, get degree, help family, make parents proud. In their small Punjab town, Ana's family lived in a modest house with cracking walls and a leaking roof. Her father drove a rickshaw during monsoon season and worked construction when the weather cleared. Her mother stitched clothes for neighbors, earning just enough to keep the family fed. But they had something more valuable than money. They had a daughter who scored top marks in every exam and spoke English better than her teachers. When Ana turned 22, her parents made a decision that would change everything. They sold the small plot of land behind their house land that had been in the family for 3 generations. They borrowed money from cousins, from neighbors, even from a local moneylender who charged interest rates that would cripple them for years. In total, they scraped together 800,000 rupees, nearly $10,000, everything they had and more. All of this money went to one man, Balraj Singh, an education agent who operated from a cramped office above a mobile phone repair shop. Balraj wasn't just any consultant. He was a magician who transformed impossible dreams into Canadian realities. At least, that's what he promised. Your daughter will study in Ontario, Balraj told Ana's parents, sliding a glossy brochure across his desk. 2 years for her diploma, then permanent residency, then she sponsors your family. This is how successful families do it. He produced documents that looked official acceptance letters with university letterheads, course catalogs, even housing arrangements. Everything seemed legitimate. Balraj had helped dozens of families from their district, and many of their children were now living in Canada, sending money home and building better lives. What Ana's parents didn't know was that Balraj operated with a network of associates across 2 continents. He had contacts in immigration offices, relationships with questionable colleges, and access to document templates that could fool even experienced visa officers. His success rate was high because his methods were sophisticated and completely illegal. 2 months later, Ana boarded a plane to Toronto with a student visa, acceptance letter, and dreams that felt finally within reach. She enrolled in classes at a small private college in Ontario, found work at an Indian restaurant to pay for expenses, and sent money home whenever possible. For 2 years, she lived this double existence, studying during the day, working nights, and slowly building the life her parents had sacrificed everything to give her. She even started believing her own story. The classes were real, the teachers existed, her grades were legitimate. Maybe the paperwork complications Balraj had mentioned were just technicalities. Maybe everything would work out exactly as planned. But here's what Ananya didn't know. While she was building her new life in Canada, immigration authorities were conducting the largest document fraud investigation in the country's history. They had identified thousands of suspicious acceptance letters, flagged dozens of questionable education agents, and started building criminal cases that would destroy entire networks. Balraj's name was already on their list. While Ananya was building what she thought was a legitimate life in Canada, Balraj Singh was running one of the most sophisticated education scams in immigration history. His operation wasn't some amateur scheme, it was a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise that stretched from Punjab villages to Toronto office buildings. Here's how Balraj's network actually functioned. He had partnerships with over 20 so-called colleges across Ontario and British Columbia. These weren't legitimate educational institutions. They were diploma mills that existed primarily on paper, housed in strip mall offices with minimal staff and no real academic programs. The college that accepted Ananya was called Northern Ontario Institute of Technology, a name designed to sound impressive and official. But Northern Ontario Institute of Technology had exactly 4 employees: a receptionist, an administrator, and 2 part-time instructors who taught basic English and computer skills to international students. The acceptance letters Balraj provided were manufactured using stolen letterheads, forged signatures, and fake course catalogs that looked authentic enough to fool visa officers who processed hundreds of applications daily. Balraj's associates in Canada would receive lists of prospective students from agents like him in India. They would create acceptance packages, complete with housing arrangements and fee structures, then send them back to India where agents sold them to desperate families. The students would arrive, enroll in minimal courses to maintain their visa status, then work illegally to survive while believing they were earning legitimate credentials. The genius of this system was its scale. Immigration officials might flag individual suspicious applications, but when thousands of students were arriving with similar documentation from dozens of different agents, the patterns became harder to detect. By the time Ananya arrived in 2019, Balraj had successfully placed over 500 students in Canadian colleges and collected nearly $4 million in fees. But Canadian Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada had started noticing irregularities. Small details at first: colleges issuing acceptance letters for programs they didn't offer, identical formatting across applications from different provinces, addresses that led to empty office buildings. By 2020, they launched Operation Clean Sweep, a comprehensive investigation targeting fraudulent education networks. Before I continue, let me ask you something. Would you expose a fraud if it meant destroying someone's life? Most people would stay silent, especially when it involves family honor and community reputation. But if you're different, if you believe truth matters more than comfort, prove it by hitting that subscribe button, because what happens next shows exactly why good people staying quiet allows evil to flourish. While this investigation was building momentum, Ananya's parents were making another life-changing decision back in Punjab. They arranged her marriage to Arjun Malhotra, whose family had immigrated to Canada 15 years earlier and established themselves in Brampton's thriving Indian community. The Malhotras were exactly the kind of family Ananya's parents hoped to join. Arjun's father owned a successful trucking company, his mother worked as a registered nurse, and they lived in a 2-story house in one of Brampton's most respected neighborhoods. They were proud people who valued education, hard work, and reputation above everything else. When the families began marriage negotiations, Ananya's parents shared her academic achievements with pride. They showed the Malhotras her acceptance letter, her enrollment confirmation, even photographs of her at college events. The Malhotras were impressed. Here was a young woman who had succeeded in Canada on her own merits, who could contribute to their family's continued success. What they didn't realize was that they were looking at expertly crafted lies. Arjun himself was genuinely excited about marrying someone who shared his educational background and Canadian experience. He had completed a business degree at Ryerson University and was working toward his own permanent residency status. He imagined building a life with someone who understood the challenges of immigrant success and could help navigate the complex systems they both faced. The wedding was planned for March 2021. A grand celebration that would unite two families and celebrate Ananya's achievements in Canada. Invitations were sent to over 300 guests. Catering was arranged for traditional Punjabi dishes. A photography team was hired to document what everyone expected to be a perfect beginning. 3 weeks before the wedding, Arjun's younger cousin Ravi made a discovery that would destroy everything. Ravi worked in the admissions office at George Brown College in Toronto, processing international student applications and verifying educational credentials. It was routine work, checking documents, confirming enrollment status, flagging inconsistencies. During a family dinner, Arjun's mother proudly showed Ravi the acceptance letter that Ananya's family had provided. "Look how accomplished she is," his aunt beamed, sliding the document across the table. Northern Ontario Institute of Technology. Such a prestigious program. Ravi examined the letter with professional eyes. Something felt wrong immediately. The logo placement was slightly off-center. The email signature used a font that didn't match the college's official communications. Most telling, the course code referenced a program that didn't exist in Noit's current catalog. Curious, Ravi spent his lunch break the next day calling Northern Ontario Institute of Technology directly. After being transferred 3 times, he reached someone in their registrar's office who confirmed his suspicions. "We have no record of any student named Ana Varma. The course codes on this acceptance letter don't match our system. This document appears to be fraudulent." Ravi faced an impossible choice. Should he expose the fraud and destroy his cousin's upcoming marriage? Should he stay silent and allow his family to unknowingly welcome a criminal into their home? The weight of this knowledge felt crushing. Whatever he decided would have consequences that reached far beyond just one wedding. He decided to tell Arjun privately, hoping they could handle the situation quietly. That evening, he called his cousin and shared what he'd discovered. Arjun's reaction was immediate and devastating. "Are you absolutely certain? This can't be right." Her parents seemed so honest, so proud of her achievements. But the evidence was undeniable. Ravi had screenshots of his call logs, email confirmations from the college registrar, and detailed comparisons between legitimate NOIT documents and Ananya's acceptance letter. Every piece of proof pointed to the same conclusion: Ananya's entire Canadian education story was fabricated. The night before the wedding ceremony, Arjun confronted Ananya beneath strings of marigold flowers and the bustling preparation of 300 guests. What was meant to be a private conversation in the garden became an hour-long emotional breakdown that would haunt both families forever. "How long have you known?" Arjun demanded, his voice shaking with betrayal and rage. "How long have you been lying to my family?" Ananya broke down completely. Through tears and desperate pleas, she explained how Balraj had assured her the documents were certified and legitimate. She described the pressure from her parents, the financial sacrifices they'd made, and her genuine belief that everything would work out once she completed her studies. "I thought the acceptance was real," she sobbed. "Balraj showed us other students who used the same process. I attended classes, I got grades. I thought it was just paperwork issues that would be resolved." Arjun wanted to believe her, but the deception cut too deep. His family's reputation was everything to them. They had built their success in Canada through legitimate means: honest work, proper documentation, respect for immigration laws. Now they were connected to criminal fraud just days before a public wedding celebration. "We need to postpone the ceremony," Arjun said finally. "We need time to understand what this means legally, what consequences we might face." Ananya begged him to reconsider. She promised to fix everything, to contact Balraj immediately, to find legitimate documentation that would satisfy his family's concerns. But Arjun had already made his decision. The wedding would not proceed as planned. I need you to comment below. Would you have told the truth or kept the secret? Would you have destroyed someone's life to protect your family's reputation? Or would you have found another way? Because what happens next will shock you. What neither Arjun nor Ananya realized was that their private conversation had been overheard by multiple family members. By morning, screenshots of the fraudulent documents were circulating through WhatsApp groups between both families. The secret was about to explode into public humiliation that would have consequences neither of them could survive. At 6:47 a.m. on March 15, 2021, everything changed. A WhatsApp message containing screenshots of Ananya's fraudulent acceptance letter appeared in the family group chat shared between the Varmas and Malhotras. What had been a private discovery just hours earlier was now public knowledge among dozens of relatives, wedding planners, and close friends. The message was sent by Arjun's aunt, who had overheard the garden confrontation and decided the families deserved to know the truth before proceeding with such an expensive ceremony. Her intentions may have been protective, but the timing was catastrophic. Within minutes, phones were buzzing across Brampton and Punjab. Screenshots were forwarded from chat to chat, each transfer adding commentary that grew more damaging with every share. Can you believe this deception? How could they lie to us? What else are they hiding? The digital wildfire spread faster than anyone could control. By 8 a.m., guests who were supposed to be celebrating were instead gossiping about fraud and criminal charges. The groom's family gathered for an emergency meeting, debating whether to cancel the ceremony entirely. The bride's family, receiving furious phone calls from Punjab, scrambled to contain damage that had already gone far beyond repair. When the Bharat procession arrived at 11 a.m., the groom's ceremonial journey to claim his bride, the usual joy and excitement was replaced by tense whispers and suspicious glances. Guests who should have been dancing and celebrating were instead checking their phones for updates about the scandal. The wedding hall, decorated with thousands of rupees worth of flowers and fabric, felt heavy with judgment and expectation. Everyone knew something was wrong, but the ceremony had to proceed. Too much money had been spent. Too many people had traveled too far. Too much family honor was at stake. Ananya appeared in her red lehenga looking beautiful but terrified. Her hands shook as relatives helped adjust her jewelry. Her mother stayed close, whispering reassurances that sounded more desperate than comforting. "Everything will be fine," she kept repeating. "This will all be forgotten once you're married." The ceremony began with traditional Sanskrit prayers, but the usual reverence was interrupted by hushed conversations and critical stares. When the priest called for family blessings, several relatives from the groom's side remained seated, a public display of disapproval that everyone noticed. At 12:30 p.m., just as the couple was supposed to exchange garlands, Arjun's cousin Ravi stood up and made an announcement that shattered any remaining pretense. Before this ceremony continues, there are questions about fraudulent documentation that need to be addressed publicly. The hall exploded into chaos. Voices rose from every direction. The groom's family demanded explanations and postponement. The bride's family pleaded for understanding and privacy. Guests pulled out phones to record the confrontation, ensuring that this humiliation would be preserved and shared across social media platforms. Ananya, overwhelmed by the public shame and verbal attacks from multiple directions, fled to a small preparation room adjacent to the main hall. Her mother and two aunts followed, closing the door behind them to create privacy for what everyone knew would be a crucial conversation. What happened in that room became the subject of intense investigation later, but witnesses reported hearing raised voices, sobbing, and references to police involvement and deportation consequences. The conversation lasted approximately 20 minutes and included several phone calls that may have determined Ananya's fate. This is why I expose these stories. Because someone needs to speak for victims like Ananya, who get trapped between family expectations and criminal systems. If you agree that truth matters more than reputation, subscribe and ring that bell, because what happens next shows exactly why staying silent enables tragedy. At 1:15 p.m., Ananya received her first phone call. It was from Balraj Singh, who had been contacted by panicking families across Punjab as news of the wedding scandal spread. Witnesses later reported hearing Ananya pleading for solutions and being told there were ways to handle the situation quietly. The second call came at 1:35 p.m. from a relative who advised her to sign the marriage documents anyway and deal with the fraud issues privately later to save both families from complete social destruction. At 1:47 p.m., a scream echoed from the preparation room. When family members rushed inside, they found Ananya collapsed on the floor, unconscious and unresponsive. Her mother was shaking her shoulders frantically, calling her name repeatedly. A glass of water sat empty on the table beside prescription bottles that hadn't been there an hour earlier. Emergency services were called immediately. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes and found Ananya in cardiac distress with extremely low blood pressure and dilated pupils. They administered CPR and rushed her to Brampton General Hospital, but by 3:22 p.m., doctors pronounced her dead. The wedding celebration had become a crime scene. Detective Maria Santos arrived at Brampton General Hospital 40 minutes after Ananya was pronounced dead. What she expected to find was a tragic suicide. A young woman overwhelmed by shame who took her own life rather than face criminal charges and family disgrace. What she actually discovered launched one of the most complex investigations in the region's history. The first red flag appeared during the preliminary examination. Ananya's purse contained no prescription medications, no suicide note, and no evidence of planning or preparation for self-harm. Her phone showed no internet searches for overdose methods, no goodbye messages to family members, and no indication that she had been contemplating suicide. More troubling, hospital staff reported that family members had been evasive and contradictory when asked basic questions about Ananya's medical history and the circumstances leading to her collapse. Some claimed she had been taking medication for anxiety. Others insisted she never used any drugs. Several relatives changed their stories multiple times during initial interviews. Detective Santos secured the wedding venue as a potential crime scene and began collecting evidence that would ultimately fill 17 boxes. She confiscated phones from 32 guests, downloaded WhatsApp conversations from both family group chats, and gathered witness statements that revealed significant inconsistencies about the timeline of events. The autopsy results, completed 3 days later, transformed the investigation entirely. Dr. Patricia Chan, the chief medical examiner, found concentrated levels of lorazepam in Ananya's bloodstream, nearly 4 times the therapeutic dose. The drug, a powerful sedative typically prescribed for severe anxiety disorders, had been mixed with alcohol, creating a lethal combination that would have caused unconsciousness within minutes and death within an hour. The crucial discovery was that Ananya had never been prescribed lorazepam by any physician in Canada or India. Medical records from both countries showed no history of anxiety treatment, no psychiatric consultations, and no legitimate access to prescription sedatives. Someone had obtained these drugs specifically to administer them to Ananya. Dr. Chen's report noted additional findings that suggested foul play. Defensive wounds on Ananya's arms consistent with struggling against physical restraint, bruising on her throat that indicated possible forced ingestion, and traces of the drug under her fingernails, evidence that she may have tried to prevent someone from forcing pills down her throat. The investigation expanded rapidly as Detective Santos identified 3 distinct groups with compelling motives to silence Ananya permanently. First was Balraj Singh, the education agent whose entire criminal network was collapsing under government scrutiny. Phone records showed he had received calls from 17 different families on the day of Ananya's wedding, all demanding refunds or threatening to report him to authorities. Immigration officials had already frozen his business accounts and issued warrants for his arrest on fraud charges. If Ananya testified against him, his sentence would increase from financial penalties to serious prison time. Second was the Malhotra family, whose reputation and legal status in Canada could have been destroyed by association with immigration fraud. Arjun's father held contracts with government transportation agencies that required security clearances. His mother's nursing license could be revoked if she was connected to criminal activity. The family faced potential deportation proceedings if investigators determined they had knowingly participated in document fraud. Third were Ananya's own relatives, who faced financial ruin and social ostracism if the fraud became public knowledge. They had borrowed money at devastating interest rates to pay Balraj's fees. If Ananya was deported or charged with crimes, those debts would still need to be repaid while their family name was destroyed throughout their community. The fact that this case remains unsolved should anger you. If it does, show your support by liking this video because most people will just scroll past while killers walk free, and that's exactly how justice gets buried along with victims like Ananya. Detective Santos discovered that all three groups had representatives in that small preparation room during the crucial 20 minutes before Ananya's collapse. Phone records showed multiple calls between family members and Balraj during that time frame, suggesting coordination and planning rather than spontaneous panic. The most damning evidence came from recovered WhatsApp messages that had been hastily deleted from several phones. These conversations revealed discussions about solving the problem permanently, references to making sure she can't cause more damage, and specific mentions of prescription medications that could help her sleep through the consequences. But identifying suspects and proving murder are completely different challenges. Despite having clear motives, potential access to the murder weapon, and opportunity to commit the crime, Detective Santos faced a wall of cultural silence and family loyalty that made gathering conclusive evidence nearly impossible. Every witness had been coached on what to say. Every family member claimed ignorance about medication sources. Every phone had been wiped of potentially incriminating evidence immediately after Ananya's death was confirmed. 3 years later, the investigation remains officially open but practically stalled. No charges have been filed, no arrests have been made, and Ananya's killer continues living freely while her family suffers in permanent disgrace. On June 18, 2021, 3 months after Ananya's death, coroner Dr. Patricia Chun released her final verdict: death by suspicious overdose manner undetermined. Those 4 words encapsulated the most frustrating aspect of this entire case. Everyone knew Ananya had been murdered, but no one could prove who did it or exactly how. The coroner's report acknowledged the evidence of forced ingestion and defensive wounds, but stopped short of ruling the death a homicide. Dr. Chun explained her decision: while the physical evidence strongly suggests foul play, the chain of custody and witness testimony contains too many inconsistencies to support a definitive murder ruling. This legal limbo meant that Detective Santos couldn't pursue homicide charges against any of the suspects, despite having compelling evidence that multiple people had both motive and opportunity to kill Ananya. The case remained officially open, but practically speaking, it was closed. The community response was immediate and divided. In Brampton's Indian diaspora, opinions split along generational and cultural lines. Older immigrants, who understood the pressures of maintaining family honor while navigating complex immigration systems, showed sympathy for everyone involved. Younger community members, particularly women, saw Ananya as a victim of systemic oppression who deserved justice regardless of her document fraud. Social media campaigns emerged demanding answers. #Justice for Ananya gained traction on Instagram and TikTok, with young South Asian women sharing their own stories of family pressure, immigration struggles, and the impossible standards they faced as daughters in traditional households. But these digital voices couldn't overcome the wall of silence that protected Ananya's killers. The investigation did expose Balraj Singh's criminal network completely. Canadian authorities arrested him 6 weeks after Ananya's death, charging him with immigration fraud, document forgery, and operating an unlicensed education consultancy. During raids on his offices, police discovered evidence linking him to over 800 fraudulent acceptance letters and approximately $6 million in illegal fees collected from desperate families. Balraj was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and permanent deportation to India. But even during his trial, he maintained that he had no direct involvement in Ananya's death and provided no information about who might have killed her to protect his criminal enterprise. This case perfectly shows why victims like Ananya get forgotten, because speaking up requires courage that most people don't have. If you're someone who refuses to stay silent when justice fails, prove it by commenting below about which suspect you think killed Ananya, because most people won't even bother to engage with stories that matter. The Malhotra family quietly relocated to Calgary within 6 months of Ananya's death, citing business opportunities but clearly seeking distance from the scandal. Arjun never married and reportedly struggles with depression and guilt about his role in the events leading to Ananya's death. Back in Punjab, Ananya's parents became complete recluses. Her father stopped driving rickshaw, unable to face the daily questions and whispered accusations from neighbors. Her mother developed severe anxiety and rarely leaves their house. The land they sold to pay for Ananya's education remains in the hands of creditors, and the family faces ongoing financial hardship from debts that will never be repaid. The most haunting aspect of this case is how many people know exactly what happened but choose silence over justice. Phone records, deleted messages, and witness statements create a clear picture of conspiracy and murder, but cultural codes of family loyalty and community protection ensure that the truth remains buried along with Ananya. 3 years later, her killer walks free while her family suffers permanent consequences for their daughter's dreams. Ananya's death became a catalyst for changes that reached far beyond one family's tragedy. Within 8 months of her murder, immigration, refugees, and Citizenship Canada implemented the most comprehensive document verification system in the country's history, requiring real-time confirmation of all educational credentials before processing student visas. The crackdown was swift and devastating for criminal networks like Balraj's. Operation Clean Sweep resulted in 847 arrests across Canada and India, seized $23 million in fraudulent fees, and exposed over 200 fake colleges operating throughout North America. Thousands of legitimate students found themselves caught in the enforcement wave, facing deportation despite having genuine credentials and honest intentions. But policy changes couldn't address the deeper cultural forces that made Ananya vulnerable in the first place. Her story revealed how immigrant women bear double burdens. They must succeed professionally to justify their family's sacrifices while also maintaining traditional roles as daughters and wives who never challenge family decisions or bring shame to their communities. Community organizations across Canada began hosting workshops about immigration fraud, but attendance remained low because discussing these topics openly meant acknowledging that many families had been deceived or had knowingly participated in document schemes. The shame associated with being victimized by agents like Balraj kept people silent, ensuring that future targets remained uninformed and vulnerable. Mental health professionals in Brampton and Surrey reported significant increases in anxiety and depression cases among young South Asian women facing similar pressures to Ananya's. Many described feeling trapped between their own aspirations and their family's expectations, with no safe space to discuss the impossible standards they faced daily. The financial devastation extended throughout entire communities. Families who had worked with Balraj's network faced not only the loss of their children's immigration status but also crushing debt from loans they had taken to pay fraudulent fees. Some sold homes, others filed for bankruptcy, and many returned to India with less than they had started with years earlier. Perhaps most tragically, Ananya's death didn't serve as the cautionary tale it should have been. Despite widespread media coverage and community awareness campaigns, similar fraudulent schemes continue operating throughout Punjab and other regions where Canadian immigration represents hope for better economic opportunities. The root causes that made Ananya's family desperate enough to trust Balraj remain unchanged. Limited economic opportunities in rural India, social pressure to succeed abroad, and the perception that Canadian education guarantees prosperity and security. Until these systemic issues are addressed, other families will continue making the same desperate choices that cost Ananya her life. Her story also highlighted how immigration fraud intersects with domestic violence and honor-based abuse. When women like Ananya are perceived as bringing shame to their families through legal troubles or social embarrassment, they become vulnerable to retaliation that can escalate to murder. 3 years after her death, Ananya's case remains a stark reminder that behind every immigration statistic is a human being whose dreams can be exploited by criminals and whose life can be ended by people who claim to love them. Ana Varma died at 24 years old, surrounded by marigold flowers and wedding guests who watched her dreams turn into a nightmare. She wasn't killed by immigration fraud or family pressure or cultural expectations. She was murdered by people who decided that protecting their own interests was worth more than a young woman's life. Her killer is still free. Her family still suffers. Her story continues to be buried under layers of community silence and cultural shame that prioritize reputation over justice. But Ananya's death teaches us something crucial about the price of dreams in a world where criminals exploit desperation and families sacrifice everything for a chance at something better. When we allow education agents like Balraj to operate without consequences, when we stay silent about document fraud because it's too uncomfortable to discuss, when we prioritize family honor over human life, we create the conditions where women like Ananya become expendable. Her memory deserves more than being forgotten in an unsolved case file. Her life had value beyond the fake credentials that led to her death. And her story matters because it exposes the deadly intersection of immigration fraud, family violence, and systemic failures that continue claiming victims across our communities. Every time someone chooses silence over speaking up, every time authorities close cases without justice, every time families prioritize shame over truth, we dishonor Ananya's memory and enable her killers to escape accountability. She deserved better, and so do the countless other women facing similar pressures today. Thank you for watching and caring about stories that matter. If this video opened your eyes to the dark side of immigration fraud, please hit that like button, subscribe for more investigative content, and ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest exposés. Your support helps us continue bringing these important stories to light.